In 6 seconds, 3 shots ended a presidency and began the greatest unsolved mystery in American history. November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas, 12:30 p.m. The presidential motorcade winds through downtown. Crowds line the streets. Security is light, relaxed. President Kennedy sits in the rear seat. Jackie, in a pink Chanel suit beside him, smiling and waving. The motorcade descends into Dealey Plaza. Trees frame the route. A grassy knoll rises to the right. 12:29 p.m. 45 seconds remain. The motorcade passes the Texas School Book Depository. No one looks up. Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman, in the front passenger seat, speaks into his radio. All seems routine. 12:30 p.m. The moment. A sound like a rifle crack echoes across the plaza. The president's hands move to his throat. His face contorts. Jackie turns toward him, confused. A second shot. The back of the presidential limousine erupts. Blood and matter spray backward onto the trunk. The woman in pink climbs onto the trunk. Her face is terror. She is crawling toward help that cannot reach her. Secret Service agent Clint Hill launches himself from the follow-up car. His trajectory is clear in the photographs. A third shot rings out. Hill reaches the limousine. He is too late, and he knows it. The motorcade driver accelerates. The vehicle surges forward toward Parkland Hospital, 16 minutes away. By 1 p.m., the President of the United States is pronounced dead. But the shooting lasted only 6 seconds. 3 shots, 1 moment, and a question that would haunt America for 60 years. Was there only one shooter? The Warren Commission would conclude Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone. But acoustic evidence suggested otherwise. Multiple eyewitness accounts described gunfire from the Grassy Knoll, contradicting the official narrative of a single sniper. The Zapruder film shows the president's head moving backward at impact, defying the physics of a shot from behind. What truly happened in those 6 seconds remains the central question of American forensic history and political mystery. November 1960. America was ready for change. A young senator from Massachusetts captured the nation's imagination with a promise of vigor, idealism, and a new generation taking the helm. John F. Kennedy defeated Richard Nixon in one of the closest elections in American history. At 43, he became the youngest elected president and the first Catholic to hold the office. The Kennedy administration cultivated an image of elegance and intellectual promise. The press called it Camelot, a mythical kingdom of American aspiration where youth, beauty, and progressive ideals converged. But beneath the polished surface of Camelot lay a treacherous geopolitical landscape. Kennedy inherited a Cold War shaped by his predecessor's policies and a covert operation already in motion against Fidel Castro's Cuba. In April 1961, Kennedy approved the Bay of Pigs invasion. CIA-backed Cuban exiles attempted to overthrow Castro. The operation was a catastrophic failure that embarrassed the young president and fractured his relationship with the intelligence community. Over 100 exiles were killed. Kennedy felt betrayed by CIA Director Allen Dulles, who had assured him of success. The president's anger was visceral and transformative, a watershed moment in his presidency. Kennedy vowed to dismantle the CIA. In November 1961, he explicitly told an aide he intended to splinter the agency into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. It was a promise he could not keep. The failure at the Bay of Pigs had consequences far beyond Langley. It radicalized anti-Castro Cuban exile networks who felt abandoned by their American sponsors and hungry for another chance to reclaim their homeland. These exile groups operated with CIA support, training, and funding. They were organized, armed, and deeply motivated. Many would later be scrutinized as potential suspects in Kennedy's assassination, men with both motive and means. But Kennedy's enemies extended far beyond Miami's exile communities. Organized crime figures had prospered during the Eisenhower administration. Kennedy's Attorney General brother Robert launched an unprecedented war on the mob. Carlos Marcello controlled organized crime in Louisiana and Texas. Santo Traficante dominated Florida's underworld and had extensive connections to Cuba. Both men were targeted by federal prosecution under Robert Kennedy's relentless campaign. In September 1962, the FBI documented that Marcello had made explicit threats against the Kennedys. According to agents, Marcello stated he would arrange for Kennedy's assassination, describing it as removing a stone from a shoe. Traficante made similar threats. These were not vague expressions of anger. They were detailed, documented intentions from men with the resources, connections, and criminal infrastructure to execute such a plan. The military-industrial complex also viewed Kennedy with suspicion. His refusal to authorize a full invasion of Cuba during the 1962 missile crisis disappointed hardliners who wanted aggressive Cold War confrontation. Joint Chiefs of Staff members believed Kennedy was insufficiently aggressive in confronting communism. Some questioned his commitment to defending American interests against Soviet expansion. The president's caution was interpreted as weakness by Cold War hawks. By late 1963, Kennedy had accumulated formidable enemies across multiple power structures. Intelligence agencies he had challenged, organized crime syndicates he was prosecuting, Cuban exiles he had betrayed, and military hardliners he had defied. No single entity had been more threatened by Kennedy than the CIA. He had questioned their competence, demanded their restructuring, and publicly blamed them for the Bay of Pigs disaster. The agency Kennedy threatened to dismantle was watching him closely. By November 1963, Kennedy's Dallas motorcade would pass through territory where multiple threads of this complex web converged. The young president who promised to splinter the CIA was driving through a landscape of enemies he had created. The question was not whether Kennedy had enemies, it was whether any of them possessed both the motive and the means to eliminate him, and which institutions might protect those responsible from accountability. He was a ghost in plain sight. Lee Harvey Oswald moved through America like a man with two shadows. Born in New Orleans in 1939, Oswald was a loner from the start. By age 17, he had enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. But something was different about this soldier. Oswald taught himself Russian. He studied communism. His fellow Marines called him Oswaldskovich, mocking his obsession with the Soviet Union. Then came the shocking defection. On October 31st, 1959, Oswald walked into the Soviet embassy in Moscow and declared his intention to become a Soviet citizen. He told Soviet officials he possessed valuable military intelligence from his time at a U-2 radar station. The Americans were horrified. The Soviets were intrigued. For nearly 3 years, Oswald lived in the Soviet Union. He worked in a radio factory in Minsk. He married Marina Prusakova, a 19-year-old Russian woman with KGB connections. Then, in 1962, Oswald did something extraordinary. He returned to America with a Russian wife, with no explanation for why Moscow let him leave. He settled in Texas and became obsessed with Cuba. Castro was the new obsession. Oswald founded a chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans in 1963. On August 9, 1963, Oswald was arrested in New Orleans for distributing pro-Cuba leaflets. Weeks later, he walked into the Cuban consulate in Mexico City. What happened in Mexico City remains classified. The FBI recorded his visits. The CIA was watching. Some say he met with Soviet agents. Others claim he was a double agent. Weeks before the assassination, Oswald acquired a rifle. He used the alias A. Heidel to purchase a 6.5 Mannlicher Carcano from a Dallas mail-order company. In October 1963, Oswald found employment at the Texas School Book Depository. He had access to the building overlooking Dealey Plaza. The president would pass directly beneath his window. Was Oswald a lone radical seeking infamy? Or was he a KGB asset, an FBI informant, a patsy in a larger game? The question haunts American history. What is certain? Lee Harvey Oswald was a man of two worlds, 3 countries, and countless secrets. When November 22nd arrived, he became the center of the greatest American mystery. November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas. A presidential motorcade enters a valley of glass and steel. Within seconds, the nation's leader lay dying. The route had changed. Just hours before, the motorcade plan was altered. The original path avoided the Texas School Book Depository entirely. The new course directed the limousine directly past the 7-story brick building. A decision made in haste, a detail that would haunt investigators for decades. At 12:30 p.m., the motorcade descended into Dealey Plaza. The president waved to crowds lining the streets. Secret Service agents maintained their positions. Routine procedure. Then, at 12:30 and approximately 30 seconds, the first shot rang out. The sound echoed across the plaza. Was it a firecracker? Backfire? No one was certain. The second shot followed 4.8 seconds later. This bullet entered the president's back and exited his throat, continuing through the governor's chest and wrist. The trajectory would become the central mystery. The third shot came 4.3 seconds after the second. This one struck with devastating certainty. The president's skull fragmented. The limousine accelerated toward Parkland Hospital, 12 blocks away. Within minutes, emergency teams worked frantically at Parkland. Surgeons noted the fatal nature of the head wound. At 1 p.m., President John F. Kennedy was pronounced dead. The nation reeled, but where had the shots originated? By 1:15 p.m., police entered the Texas School Book Depository. The building housed a warehouse of school textbooks and clerical workers. Officers climbed to the 6th floor. They discovered a sniper's nest constructed behind cardboard boxes and textbooks. 3 cartridge casings lay on the floor. A rifle was found nearby. The weapon was a Mannlicher Carcano rifle, model 1891, chambered in 6.5 millimeter. It bore a 4-power scope. The bolt action required deliberate, mechanical precision between shots. The timing was critical. The ballistic interval between the second and third shots was 4.3 seconds. Could this rifle, with its required manual bolt operation, be cycled fast enough? Investigators found a palm print on the rifle's stock, fingerprints on the shells, a paper bag allegedly used to smuggle the weapon into the building. Evidence accumulated, but questions multiplied. The 6th floor window offered a clear view of Dealey Plaza. The limousine passed directly beneath it. The distance was 88 yards, point-blank range for a trained marksman, yet skepticism persisted. Ballistics experts debated the bullet trajectories. The so-called magic bullet theory emerged, one projectile causing multiple wounds in 2 people. It defied conventional understanding. The Zapruder film captured the tragedy in 486 frames. Amateur footage showing the fatal instant in 8mm color. Every frame became a subject of obsessive analysis. Dealey Plaza itself became a crime scene under microscopy. The geometry of the plaza, the angles of fire, the witness statements, all pointed toward contradictions in the official narrative. By evening, a suspect was in custody. Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old former Marine and warehouse employee at the Texas School Book Depository. He denied the allegations. Within days, he was shot dead by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. The official investigation concluded. Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, fired 3 shots from the Texas School Book Depository's 6th floor using the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, killing President Kennedy and wounding Governor Connolly. Yet the physical evidence raised questions that persisted for decades. The ballistic timing remained controversial. Witness accounts varied. The geography of Dealey Plaza suggested multiple angles of fire that no single position could explain. The kill zone of Dealey Plaza sealed the fate of a nation. 3 seconds of gunfire, multiple wounds, 1 death. Contradictions that would define an era and fuel conspiracy theories for generations. Within hours of Kennedy's death, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. But the official story was about to take a darker turn. At 1:15 p.m. on November 22nd, Oswald was apprehended at the Texas Theater after allegedly shooting Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit just 45 minutes earlier. The Texas Theater arrest raised immediate questions. How did authorities know exactly where to find Oswald so quickly? The surveillance had seemingly failed at the critical moment, but what happened next was even more suspicious. Oswald, the only man in custody who could provide answers about the assassination, gave reporters a statement that would haunt the investigation forever. Oswald repeatedly told journalists, "I'm just a patsy." He denied shooting anyone. He insisted he was being framed. These words, spoken to reporters, were the only public statement he would ever make. For 2 days, Oswald remained in Dallas police custody. Security was supposedly airtight. The basement of police headquarters was locked down. No unauthorized personnel were permitted. Yet on Sunday morning, November 24th, 1963, something unprecedented occurred. As Oswald was being transferred through the basement in front of journalists and police, a man walked straight through security and fired a fatal shot. The man was Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner, a man with documented ties to organized crime. He had direct access to police headquarters. No one stopped him. No one questioned how he entered a secured area. Ruby shot Oswald on live television. Millions of Americans watched as the only potential witness to the assassination was silenced. The official narrative would be that Ruby acted alone, out of impulse, to protect Kennedy's widow from testifying at trial. But Ruby's connections told a different story. He had known Dallas police for years. He frequented their establishments. He had mob associates who worked in the shadows of Dallas nightlife. How did Ruby know exactly when Oswald would be in that basement? How did he bypass multiple security checkpoints? How did a man with clear mob ties gain access to the most sensitive prisoner in American history? The official investigation concluded Ruby acted alone. No conspiracy, no planning, just a spontaneous act of vigilante justice. But the questions remained unanswered. The only man who could have revealed what really happened that day in Dallas was gone. Oswald's final words, "I'm just a patsy," would echo through decades of investigations. A witness silenced, a narrative sealed, and the truth of November 22nd, 1963, died with him in that basement. In the aftermath of President John F. Kennedy's assassination, federal investigators faced an impossible task. Explain how one man killed a president in broad daylight, witnessed by thousands. The Warren Commission, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, conducted a 10-month investigation that would shape America's understanding of that fateful day for generations. Their conclusion seemed straightforward. Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, firing 3 shots from the Texas School Book Depository at the presidential motorcade. But one element of their narrative would generate decades of skepticism: the single bullet theory. This explanation proposed that a single projectile caused 7 distinct wounds across 2 men. Senior counsel Arlen Specter championed this theory. He argued that one bullet entered President Kennedy's back, exited his throat, then struck Governor John Connally, seated directly in front of him. The physical evidence presented to support this claim was Commission Exhibit 399, a bullet recovered from the presidential limousine. Its condition became central to the entire theory's credibility. What struck critics immediately was the bullet's near-pristine appearance. Despite allegedly shattering bone, penetrating multiple muscle layers, and passing through 2 bodies, it showed minimal deformation. Forensic experts noted that ammunition striking bone typically suffers massive deformation, yet this bullet remained nearly intact, leading skeptics to question whether it had struck bone at all. The geometric challenges proved equally vexing. The 2 men sat at different heights and angles. Kennedy was positioned higher and slightly to the right of Connally. For the single bullet to wound both men as described, it would require an unusual flight path. The projectile would need to change direction mid-air without any apparent deflection point. The entry and exit wound locations also raised questions. Kennedy's back wound appeared lower than his throat wound, suggesting the bullet rose upward inside his body. Ballistics experts pointed out that bullets typically maintain consistent trajectories. An upward path through a body would require the projectile to defy basic physics principles. Additionally, Governor Connolly testified that he heard the first shot, turned to look, and then was struck. This timeline suggested separate projectiles fired at different moments. The Warren Commission acknowledged criticism but maintained their conclusion. Subsequent investigations, including the House Select Committee on Assassinations in 1979, revisited the evidence with modern technology. Yet the single bullet theory remains contested. Ballistics experts, physicists, and forensic pathologists continue publishing peer-reviewed analyses questioning its physical feasibility nearly 60 years later. Whether the single bullet theory represents sound forensic reasoning or a forced conclusion to fit a predetermined narrative remains one of America's most enduring investigative controversies. Dealey Plaza, November 22, 1963. In the seconds after the final shot, multiple witnesses reported seeing smoke rising from a grassy slope in front of the presidential limousine. They didn't all point to the Texas School Book Depository. They pointed forward, toward the knoll, toward a second gunman. This is not speculation. This is testimony recorded in the immediate aftermath, before official narratives took hold. Abraham Zapruder's home movie camera captured 486 frames in 26.6 seconds. Frame 313 became the most controversial 8mm of film in American history. The presidential head moves backward violently after the fatal shot strikes. Ballistics experts asked a simple question. If a bullet fired from behind hits the back of a skull, why does the head snap backward toward the shooter? The laws of physics demanded an answer. The official Warren Commission concluded one shooter, one rifle, 3 shots, but the physical evidence suggested otherwise. The head movement defied every principle of wound ballistics. Eyewitness Jean Hill stood near the presidential limousine. She testified seeing gunfire from the Grassy Knoll. "We thought he was going to stop," she said. "We thought there was something wrong." Officer Bobby Hargis rode directly behind the limousine on his motorcycle. He reported being sprayed with what he believed was brain matter from a shot fired in front of the president. At least 12 witnesses reported hearing a shot from the Grassy Knoll. Some saw a rifleman behind the picket fence. Others described a puff of smoke. The official record acknowledged none of this. Then, in 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations reopened the case. They analyzed an audio recording from a Dallas police officer's dictabilt, a recording made during the shooting. Acoustic experts identified what appeared to be 4 gunshots, not 3. The timing, the spacing, the locations all suggested a second shooter. The committee concluded probable conspiracy. The official response was swift. New studies challenged the acoustic evidence. The debate raged for decades, but the witnesses, the men and women in Dealey Plaza that day, they had already spoken. The Grassy Knoll remains unresolved, not because evidence is absent, but because the evidence contradicts the official account. A second shooter means a second gunman. A second gunman means conspiracy at the highest levels. The Warren Commission had already decided the answer before examining all the evidence. The Grassy Knoll witnesses challenged that conclusion. In doing so, they shattered the official narrative forever. A nation was told there was no second shooter. The evidence suggests otherwise. The question persists. Who stood behind that fence? What happened in those 26.6 seconds? And why does the truth remain classified? In 1963, New Orleans was a vortex of espionage, anti-Castro plotting, and shadows within shadows. District Attorney Jim Garrison would spend the next 8 years chasing ghosts through this labyrinth. Lee Harvey Oswald worked at the Reilly Coffee Company on Magazine Street, blocks from anti-Castro operatives and CIA informants. David Ferry, a former airline pilot with a pornography collection and extremist politics, operated from a shabby apartment building downtown. Guy Bannister, a retired FBI agent, ran a private detective agency that served as a front for anti-Castro intelligence operations. These men occupied the same intelligence ecosystem. Oswald visited Bannister's office. Ferry knew Oswald. The connections seemed too precise to be coincidence. In 1966, Garrison launched his investigation. He believed Kennedy's assassination originated not in Texas, but in the fetid soil of New Orleans plotting. Clay Shaw, a New Orleans businessman, became Garrison's primary suspect. Witnesses claimed Shaw, Oswald, and Ferry met at social gatherings. Garrison theorized an elaborate conspiracy. Anti-Castro Cubans, CIA operatives, and rogue government actors planned Kennedy's murder in New Orleans. He presented homosexuality as motive, class resentment, and alleged CIA connections. Garrison's case merged plausible intelligence activity with speculative leaps. In 1969, Garrison brought Clay Shaw to trial in New Orleans. It was the only criminal proceeding directly addressing Kennedy's assassination. The prosecution presented 17 witnesses claiming Shaw's involvement. Defense attorneys systematically deconstructed each testimony, exposing memory lapses and contradictions. A key witness, Perry Russo, admitted under oath that hypnosis had influenced his recollection of Shaw's alleged involvement. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before acquitting Shaw. Reasonable doubt, they concluded, had become a chasm. Garrison's investigation exposed real elements of 1963 New Orleans intelligence activity, but collapsed under evidentiary scrutiny. Declassified documents later confirmed CIA interest in Oswald and anti-Castro operations in New Orleans. Garrison's suspicions about intelligence involvement weren't baseless, yet connecting CIA awareness of Oswald to orchestrating Kennedy's murder remained forensically and logically impossible to establish. David Ferry died mysteriously in 1967, 3 days after being interviewed by Garrison's team. Suicide or silencing remains contested. Garrison's pursuit became obsessive, eventually costing him political credibility and professional respect. The New Orleans connection, while historically intriguing, legally crumbled. The case remains America's most comprehensive attempt to prosecute Kennedy's assassination, and its failure defined how conspiracy becomes mythology. In the shadows of Cold War espionage, the Central Intelligence Agency conducted operations so classified that even Congress did not know their full scope. Operation Mongoose was born from desperation. The United States, humiliated by the Bay of Pigs invasion, authorized the CIA to eliminate Fidel Castro by any means necessary. Between 1961 and 1965, the CIA partnered with organized crime figures Sam Giancana, John Roselli, Santos Trafficante to poison, explode, or shoot the Cuban leader. None succeeded. But something darker emerged from these records: the blowback theory. When assassination plots fail against a communist adversary, does that adversary retaliate against the nation that tried to kill its leader? Lee Harvey Oswald, the man accused of assassinating President Kennedy in 1963, had documented contacts with intelligence-adjacent figures. The paper trail exists, but crucial files were destroyed. Oswald's CIA file, Oswald's FBI file, both contained sensitive information about his activities, his contacts, his movements before November 22nd. Both were heavily sanitized or vanished entirely. The Warren Commission, tasked with investigating the president's death, requested full access to intelligence records. What they received was incomplete. What they asked about was deflected. At the center of this obstruction stood James Angleton, the CIA's counterintelligence chief. A man of legendary paranoia, Angleton controlled information flows with iron discipline. Angleton believed Soviet deception operations were everywhere. He suspected moles in every agency. Some historians argue his compartmentalization of information may have obscured the truth about Oswald. The declassified record reveals that the CIA was tracking Oswald's defection to the Soviet Union in 1959. They monitored his return, They knew more than they disclosed. In 1995, the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded that a conspiracy likely existed. But the intelligence community's resistance to transparency had already calcified decades of suspicion. What remains unanswered? Did CIA operations against Castro create a security liability Oswald could exploit? Did the agency's own secrets prevent a full accounting of what happened that day in Dallas? The files stay sealed. The witnesses have aged into silence, and the agency's ghosts continue to haunt the historical record, not as proof of guilt, but as evidence of obstruction. In intelligence work, the absence of evidence is not innocence. It is the ultimate protection, and some mysteries, it seems, were designed never to be solved. In 1991, Oliver Stone's film JFK reignited a question America thought it had buried. What really happened in Dallas? Public outrage exploded. Millions demanded the truth. Congress had no choice but to listen. The result? The Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act of 1992. A law that promised transparency. A law that changed everything. For the first time, the government was legally required to release all assassination documents within 25 years. By 2017, America would finally see what had been hidden for decades. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. 3 decades have passed since Kennedy's death, yet even now, in the 21st century, thousands of pages remain classified, redacted, withheld. The CIA has invoked national security claims to keep critical information from public view. The question becomes inevitable. What could possibly require secrecy 6 decades after the president's murder? In 2017, the Trump administration ordered the final release of JFK documents. For the first time, Americans could see the surveillance network that had tracked Lee Harvey Oswald for months before November 22, 1963. The FBI had monitored Oswald's movements. They knew he had visited the Soviet and Cuban embassies. They documented his radical associations and his connections to intelligence circles. Yet they claimed to have no advance warning of the assassination. Between 2017 and 2023, additional document dumps revealed operational details that contradicted official narratives. Documents showed that U.S. intelligence agencies had maintained interest in Oswald long before his fateful trip to Dallas. The CIA's own internal memos, finally released, showed they had tracked Oswald's attempts to defect to the Soviet Union. They knew about his return to the United States. They documented his employment at the Texas School Book Depository. Yet, when asked directly by the Warren Commission, the CIA claimed to have had no operational interest in Oswald at the time of the assassination. The documents released decades later proved this statement was false. This is the pattern that emerges from 60 years of partial disclosures. The government withholds, then admits, then withholds again. Each release contains redactions. Each redaction raises new questions. In 2023, the Biden administration extended secrecy claims on remaining classified documents. The justification remained unchanged: national security. The deadline for full release has been pushed to 2025. Historians and researchers point to a troubling reality. The agencies withholding information are the same agencies whose actions are being investigated. The CIA keeps secrets about the CIA. The FBI redacts documents about the FBI. This structural conflict of interest has become the real mystery. Not what happened in Dallas, but why the full truth remains locked in classified vaults across Washington, D.C. The JFK Records Act promised transparency. Instead, it created a legal framework for managed disclosure: release documents slowly, redact selectively, control the narrative across decades. What remains classified today? Documents relating to intelligence operations, memos about foreign contacts, files on CIA activities. Each category is listed as essential to national security. Each one potentially holds answers. The circumstantial evidence is striking. If the official story is true, if Oswald acted alone, why does the government continue to hide information? Innocent actions cast no shadows, secrets do. Researchers who have accessed partially redacted documents report consistent patterns: names blacked out, operations removed, context destroyed. The released information tells a story that stops before the conclusion. The 2017 releases revealed that U.S. intelligence had considered Oswald a potential intelligence asset. Documents suggested discussion of possible recruitment. If true, this changes everything about how we understand his movements before Dallas. Yet the full operational file remains classified. The actual recruitment discussions, if they occurred, are still hidden. The contact protocols are still concealed. The strategic interest remains redacted. This is the legacy of the 1992 JFK Records Act. It created the appearance of transparency while institutionalizing secrecy. It promised release while protecting the agencies most central to the questions being asked. The files they buried remain buried. The act that promised to excavate them has instead become the mechanism that maintains their concealment. In 60 years, we have learned more from what they refused to release than from what they allowed us to see. In the aftermath of Dallas, America would never be the same. A single shot had shattered more than a president. It had fractured the very foundation of national trust. Lyndon Baines Johnson assumed the presidency on November 22, 1963, inheriting not just the office, but a nation gripped by unprecedented shock and doubt. Johnson moved swiftly. Within weeks, he pushed the Civil Rights Act through Congress, a legislative achievement Kennedy had championed but failed to secure before his death. Yet ambition would soon overshadow these early victories. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in August 1964 became the pretext for escalation. Whether the second attack actually occurred remains disputed to this day, but Johnson used it to justify massive military intervention in Vietnam. Operation Rolling Thunder commenced in March 1965. What began as measured bombing campaigns evolved into relentless airstrikes that would last 3 years, incinerating the Vietnamese countryside and American youth alike. By 1968, over 58,000 American soldiers lay dead. The images from Vietnam, napalm-scorched children, village massacres, body bags, flooded American television screens nightly. The credibility gap between official statements and battlefield reality became impossible to ignore. Trust in government institutions began to erode like a shoreline under relentless tide. Citizens questioned whether their leaders were telling them the truth. The Pentagon Papers, leaked years later, would confirm their deepest suspicions of systematic deception. Just 5 years after Dallas, on June 5, 1968, another Kennedy fell to an assassin's bullet. Robert F. Kennedy, the slain president's brother and a champion of the dispossessed, was shot at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. The nation reeled. Just 2 months earlier, on April 4, 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated on a Memphis motel balcony. 2 giants of moral authority, gone. America seemed to be devouring its own prophets. The summer of 1968 erupted into urban chaos. Riots consumed Washington, D.C., Chicago, and dozens of cities. The Democratic Convention in Chicago descended into scenes of police brutality, broadcast live to horrified Americans. Democracy itself seemed to be fracturing on screen. The Warren Commission's conclusions about Kennedy's assassination faced mounting skepticism. Eyewitness accounts contradicted the official narrative. The single bullet theory struck many as implausible. Doubt had become permanent. By the early 1970s, Watergate would expose systemic corruption at the highest levels. The FBI's COINTELPRO programs revealed illegal surveillance of American citizens and dissidents. The government had lied. The evidence was undeniable. A generation that had been taught to trust authority now questioned everything. The 1960s idealism of Camelot gave way to the disillusionment and cynicism of the 1970s. The collective American psyche had been fundamentally altered. Dallas had been the psychological frontier where American innocence died. What followed was a cascade of revelations, assassinations, and wars that would define an era. The nation that emerged was scarred, skeptical, and forever changed. The questions raised in Dallas about power, about truth, about the protection of democracy itself would echo through American consciousness for decades. Some mysteries, once opened, can never truly be closed. 50 years have passed. The evidence remains scattered, the witnesses mostly gone. Yet one question refuses to fade. 5 competing narratives have emerged from the Dallas archives, each supported by evidence, each dismissed by skeptics. The lone gunman theory suggests Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, fired from the Texas school book depository, yet ballistic analysis reveals inconsistencies. The fatal headshot trajectory contradicts eyewitness accounts of gunfire origin. Multiple shooters remain plausible. The Warren Commission concluded otherwise, despite mounting physical contradictions. The mafia theory draws from documented mob connections. Jack Ruby owned nightclubs frequented by organized crime figures. Oswald's uncle had reputed mob ties. Motive existed. Kennedy's Justice Department, led by his brother Robert, aggressively pursued racketeers, but mafia operatives typically claimed credit for major hits. Silence suggests institutional involvement. The CIA had motive and capability. Kennedy rejected their Bay of Pigs invasion strategy, demanded troop withdrawals from Vietnam, and fired Director Allen Dulles. Declassified documents confirm the CIA conducted assassination training. They harbored intense institutional resentment toward the president. Yet direct evidence linking the agency to Dallas remains circumstantial, deliberately obscured by decades of redaction. Anti-Castro Cuban exiles possessed both motive and resources. They blamed Kennedy for the Bay of Pigs failure, for backing the failed invasion, and for secretly negotiating with Castro. Training camps in Florida attracted CIA operatives and organized crime figures. The deep state hypothesis suggests a coordinated operation involving multiple actors, rogue intelligence officials, organized crime associates, and Cuban exile groups working toward a shared objective. Compartmentalized knowledge ensured no single person knew the complete picture. This compartmentalization itself explains the perpetual mystery. No surviving witness can provide a complete narrative because no single witness ever possessed complete knowledge. The assassination was a puzzle deliberately fragmented among conspirators. Time itself becomes an adversary. Key witnesses died under questionable circumstances. Jack Ruby, while imprisoned, from sudden cancer. Witnesses to Oswald's movements disappeared. Documents remain classified. Memory deteriorates, becomes unreliable, contradicts itself across decades. Forensic psychologists confirm that eyewitness testimony degrades significantly after even months pass. 50 years compounds this erosion exponentially. False memories integrate with genuine ones. Suggestion and media coverage contaminate recollection. The truth grows increasingly inaccessible. The surviving records themselves contain deliberate gaps. The CIA withheld files from the Warren Commission. The FBI destroyed evidence. Autopsy records remained restricted. Power structures demonstrated remarkable coordination in controlling historical narrative through systematic information suppression. Yet the cultural obsession persists. Americans return repeatedly to this singular moment, seeking resolution that institutional power deliberately prevents. The Kennedy assassination became America's foundational doubt about official authority and government transparency. No mystery in American history generated comparable cultural penetration. Conspiracy theories, documentary films, academic research, and popular speculation continue multiplying. This sustained obsession reveals something fundamental about American consciousness, a deep institutional distrust. The Kennedy assassination became the rupture point where Americans collectively acknowledged that official narratives might contradict reality, that power structures maintain secrets, that the truth might remain permanently inaccessible despite overwhelming public interest and democratic demand. The Warren Commission's certainty now appears almost naive. In 1964, institutional authority commanded respect. Americans accepted official conclusions with limited skepticism. The Kennedy assassination fractured this deference permanently, inaugurating the modern era of institutional doubt. Declassified documents continue emerging, yet each new revelation raises additional questions rather than providing resolution. The pattern itself becomes significant. Institutional power maintains control through graduated disclosure, releasing information without clarification, preserving fundamental uncertainty. The enduring mystery reflects America's relationship with power itself. We simultaneously demand transparency while accepting its systematic denial. We create investigative structures knowing they will be compromised. We construct narratives acknowledging their probable falsity. Perhaps the assassination's greatest significance lies not in identifying the shooter, but in revealing how power operates. Through silence, through compartmentalized knowledge, through strategic forgetting, through institutional coordination that leaves no singular villain, no clear responsibility. 50 years forward, the question remains unanswered. It may remain forever unanswered, not from insufficient evidence, but from deliberate institutional barriers to knowledge. The Kennedy assassination endures as America's collective monument to uncertainty, to the possibility that power preserves its secrets indefinitely.